We have a consumer alert tonight. GM is recalling nearly 600,000 full-size U.S. trucks and SUVs. The company saying that the V8 engines can fail without warning, raising the risk of a crash. Manufacturing defects in the connecting rod and crankshaft engine components can lead to engine damage. So this recall now includes the listed V8 engine models that you see here. To fix the problem, dealers will inspect the engine for repair or replacement free of charge, and owners will receive a notification letter from the company. To a General Motors recall involving more than 600,000 vehicles. GM is recalling four-wheel trucks and SUVs.
For over a century, General Motors has stood as one of America's industrial pillars, a company that built not just cars, but confidence. Families bought Chevrolets, GMCs and Cadillacs believing in reliability, craftsmanship and safety, yet the trust that once powered GM's global dominance has come under unprecedented scrutiny. A series of investigations, lawsuits, and leaked internal documents have painted a deeply troubling picture of corporate decisions that prioritize cost savings over consumer safety, privacy, and accountability. What began as a few isolated recalls has evolved into one of the most significant crises in modern automotive history. A case study in how brand loyalty can become collateral damage in the pursuit of profit. In recent years, evidence has emerged showing that GM executives were aware of dangerous defects in some of their most popular vehicles long before the public was alerted. Whistleblowers, journalists, and government investigations have revealed a culture of concealment, one where life-threatening faults were debated not in terms of safety implications, but in financial terms. Emails and memos suggest that the company conducted cost-benefit analysis comparing the expense of recalls with potential payouts from lawsuits. In some cases, the company allegedly determined it would be cheaper to settle deaths and injuries than to replace faulty components. This revelation ignited outrage among consumers and lawmakers alike. The GM scandal is no longer about a single defective part. It represents a systemic breakdown in ethics and oversight. It's a reminder that corporations entrusted with millions of lives have the power, and too often, the willingness to gamble with public safety for profit. Over the next sections, we'll examine how GM's troubles unfolded, the hidden leaks, the human impact, the privacy concerns, the legal backlash, and the broader consequences rippling through the automotive world. What follows is not just a story about cars, it's a story about broken promises, misplaced priorities, and the high price of corporate silence. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. The unraveling of GM's credibility began not with a press conference, but with a leak. In early reports, obtained by investigative journalists, internal GM documents surfaced, showing that engineers and executives had known about serious safety defects for years before any recalls were issued. These leaks didn't come from competitors or hackers. They came from inside GM itself. Employees, frustrated with the company's reluctance to act, began quietly releasing evidence that exposed what many had long suspected, that GM's commitment to safety first was more slogan than substance. The documents revealed troubling patterns. In one case, engineers had identified ignition switch malfunctions that could disable airbags, steering, and braking systems. Rather than immediately alert regulators, internal teams debated the potential financial fallout. Fixing the issue across millions of vehicles would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Legal analysts later found memos where decision-makers compared that cost against projected lawsuit settlements. Cold calculation that stunned the public once it became known. The internal logic was simple. Most cars wouldn't fail, and even if some did, the financial exposure might still be cheaper than a full recall. These revelations triggered a cascade of media coverage and forced GM to respond. Executives initially described the leaks as taken out of context, suggesting that decisions were made with incomplete information. But as more documents emerged, some spanning over a decade, the defense grew untenable. Former employees began testifying that safety concerns had been raised repeatedly, only to be ignored or buried in bureaucracy. Federal investigators soon launched formal inquiries, demanding answers about how many lives might have been affected by those delayed recalls. For consumers, The leak changed everything. It shattered the perception that GM's missteps were isolated incidents or honest mistakes. Instead, it exposed a mindset where financial optimization overshadowed moral obligation. In households across America, loyal customers who had driven GM cars for generations began to ask themselves a hard question. If the company knew about life-threatening defects and kept quiet, could it ever be trusted again? The answer would unfold in the months that followed, as investigators uncovered just how deep the concealment went and how many ordinary drivers were unknowingly placed in danger. The documents exposed in the leak were only the beginning. Once investigators and journalists gained access to GM's internal communications, a troubling reality surfaced. The defects extended far beyond a single ignition switch or a limited production batch. They spanned multiple models, years, and systems, touching everything from airbags and power steering to braking and electrical components. Federal databases later showed that between 2010 and 2023, millions of GM vehicles were recalled for issues ranging from engine stalling to faulty airbags that could fail to deploy in crashes. Some of the most alarming cases involve vehicles suddenly losing power on highways, leaving drivers stranded without steering or braking control. Others centered on electrical fires caused by poorly insulated wiring harnesses. In one instance, a malfunctioning sensor could cause the airbag system to deactivate without warning. These weren't isolated manufacturing mistakes. Many stemmed from design flaws that engineers had documented internally years earlier. A report by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration later concluded that GM had repeatedly delayed or limited recalls to avoid negative publicity. In some cases, engineers were instructed to label defects as performance anomalies rather than safety risks. The goal was to manage public perception, an approach that allowed vehicles with known dangers to remain on the road far longer than they should have. For families who owned these cars, the consequences were deeply personal. Drivers recounted terrifying moments when their vehicles lost power during high-speed travel or when airbags failed during collisions. Consumer advocacy groups began compiling hundreds of testimonials, many of which were later presented in class action lawsuits. Each story carried the same painful theme. Customers believed their vehicles were safe because GM told them so. The growing body of evidence painted a picture of systemic neglect. Rather than taking a proactive stance, GM often waited until defect-related fatalities or regulatory pressure made inaction impossible. By the time large-scale recalls were finally announced, years had passed and trust had eroded. The image of GM as a dependable American icon was replaced by something darker, a corporation seemingly willing to gamble with human life. The question soon shifted from what went wrong to why it was allowed to go wrong. The answer lay in a web of financial incentives and internal policies that prioritized short-term cost savings over long-term responsibility. When the defects became public knowledge, thousands of customers turned to GM's warranty system for relief. After all, a warranty is meant to be a safety net, a formal promise that the company stands behind its engineering. Instead, many customers discovered a maze of denials, technical loopholes, and fine print that left them paying out of pocket for failures they believed were covered. Complaints began surfacing on consumer forums and social media. Owners of vehicles less than 3 years old reported being told their warranty claims were invalid because the damage was classified as wear and tear. Others said their repair appointments were delayed until their warranty period expired, forcing them to pay full costs afterward. In several states, class action suits were filed alleging deceptive warranty practices and intentional delays by authorized dealers. The financial impact on ordinary families was immense. Many had financed vehicles worth $30,000 or more, budgeting carefully under the assumption that major repairs would be covered. Instead, engine or transmission failures left them with bills running into thousands. For retirees and small business owners who relied on their vehicles for income, these unexpected costs were devastating. Some owners reported losing their cars altogether after being unable to afford repairs. Industry analysts pointed out that GM's warranty problems weren't just customer service failures. They were symptoms of a broader corporate strategy. Internal targets emphasized cutting warranty expenditures as a key performance metric. This created a culture where rejecting claims was rewarded and customer satisfaction became secondary. Dealership employees later testified that they were under pressure to minimize payouts, even when evidence clearly showed manufacturing faults. The warranty crisis also had a psychological dimension. GM's reputation was built on generational loyalty. Families that had driven Chevrolets or Bugats for decades now felt betrayed. It wasn't just a car breaking down. One longtime customer told reporters, it was the feeling that we didn't matter anymore. As lawsuits multiplied and regulators began reviewing consumer protection violations, GM faced a reckoning. Yet, just as the company's legal troubles mounted, a new and unexpected controversy emerged, one that had nothing to do with broken parts, but with broken privacy. In an age where cars have become computers on wheels, data is as valuable as fuel. Every trip, acceleration pattern, and GPS coordinate can tell a detailed story about a driver's habits. GM embraced this technological shift, but according to multiple reports and regulatory filings, it also exploited it. By 2024, privacy advocates uncovered evidence that GM had been collecting vast amounts of driver data and sharing it with third-party companies, including insurers and marketing firms. At first, these practices were buried in user agreements that few customers ever read. The fine print allowed GM to gather telematics data, information about location, speed, and braking patterns, and share it with approved partners. But investigative journalists revealed that many drivers were unaware their data was being used to adjust insurance premiums or target advertising. For instance, insurers could receive driving behavior scores derived directly from GM servers, often resulting in higher rates for customers who had no idea they were being monitored. The revelation sparked outrage. Drivers who had already endured defects and warranty denials now learned their own vehicles were quietly profiting off their private lives. Privacy groups filed complaints with the Federal Trade Commission, arguing that GM's consent process was misleading and failed to meet transparency standards. GM defended its data program by stating that the information was anonymized and used to enhance driver experience and safety. However, privacy researchers countered that anonymization is often reversible when datasets are combined with external information. In short, a company could easily reconstruct an individual's driving history, favorite routes, or even home address. The ethical implications were staggering. GM, once accused of valuing profits over safety, now faced accusations of commodifying trust itself. A car, a product meant to provide mobility and security, had become a surveillance device, generating revenue long after the sale. This scandal marked a turning point. It shifted public perception of GM from a manufacturer struggling with engineering problems to a conglomerate exploiting its customers' personal lives. Regulators began probing whether these practices violated state privacy laws, and lawmakers proposed new rules limiting how automakers could monetize user data. What had started as a safety scandal was now expanding into a broader debate about corporate accountability in the digital age, and GM was once again at the center of it. As the defect and privacy controversies deepened, attention turned inward to GM's corporate culture. Investigations by the U.S. Department of Justice and several Senate committees uncovered what former employees described as a culture of silence. Engineers who raised concerns about safety defects often found their warnings diluted by layers of management, rewritten into vague technical notes, or quietly removed from reports. One senior engineer testified that recommendations for urgent recalls stopped cold once they hit the finance office. This statement encapsulated a deeper problem. Decisions that should have been guided by engineering principles were instead filtered through cost projections. Internal audits later revealed that GM's quality control chain had been fragmented by decades of restructuring. Safety and cost divisions competed for influence, and performance metrics rewarded savings more than prevention. In quarterly meetings, executives praised teams for keeping warranty costs low, even when doing so meant denying legitimate claims. Meanwhile, whistleblowers faced retaliation. Some were reassigned, others left altogether, unwilling to work in an environment where caution was seen as disloyalty. The tone from the top reinforced this mindset. Emails reviewed by congressional investigators included remarks from senior leaders referring to safety fixes as PR risks rather than moral imperatives. The company's crisis management playbooks emphasized controlling media narratives instead of addressing root causes. Public relations consultants coached executives to express sympathy without admitting liability, a strategy that later drew criticism for appearing insincere. Former communications staff said they were instructed to keep messaging optimistic even while internal investigations were ongoing. Analysts argue that GM's culture mirrored a broader trend in corporate America, one where shareholder value eclipses long-term trust. For years, record profits masked eroding ethics, and management systems rewarded those who avoided financial losses, not those who prevented harm. By the time the company realized how corrosive this approach had become, the damage was done. Its internal credibility had collapsed alongside its public image. Public outrage eventually pushed lawmakers and regulators to act. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration reopened closed cases, demanding new data on delayed recalls. The Federal Trade Commission launched parallel probes into GM's warranty and data collection practices. At the federal level, the Justice Department's Criminal Division began investigating whether executives had knowingly misled regulators or withheld safety information. It was the largest coordinated review of an automaker since the Volkswagen emission scandal. In congressional hearings broadcast nationwide, senators questioned GM's top executives about timelines, internal memos, and cost-benefit analyses. The testimonies were tense. Lawmakers held up printed emails showing executives debating whether to issue recalls or wait for trend confirmation. One senator summarized the frustration. "This isn't a defect problem, it's a decision problem." GM's leadership apologized repeatedly, but stopped short of admitting criminal wrongdoing, describing the events as breakdowns in process. That phrasing only intensified criticism. State attorneys general from more than a dozen states filed lawsuits alleging deceptive trade practices, arguing that GM misrepresented vehicle safety and warranty protections. Several of these cases eventually merged into a multi-district litigation effort, seeking billions in damages. While settlements began to emerge, consumer advocates warned that financial penalties alone could not restore confidence. "The fines hurt less than the funerals," said one safety advocacy spokesperson during a hearing. The regulatory fallout also triggered industry-wide reforms. The NHTSA proposed stricter disclosure deadlines for automakers, requiring companies to report potential safety hazards within 5 days of discovery. The FTC drafted new guidelines mandating explicit consumer consent before vehicle data could be shared. Meanwhile, class action plaintiffs sought court orders compelling GM to publish future defect investigations publicly, an unprecedented demand for transparency in automotive history. Despite these actions, skepticism lingered. Many observers pointed to past scandals, where corporate contrition faded once public attention waned. Would GM truly change, or would it simply pay its fines and return to business as usual? That question became the focus of analysts and shareholders alike, as the scandal began to manifest not only in courtrooms, but also on Wall Street. The financial repercussions of GM's crisis arrived swiftly. Within months of the first major lawsuits, the company's stock lost nearly 30% of its value. Analysts cited mounting warranty liabilities, recall costs, and reputational damage as key drivers of the decline. Quarterly filings revealed billions of dollars set aside for legal reserves, funds that directly cut into profit margins. Credit rating agencies placed GM on negative watch, warning that continued litigation could threaten future borrowing capacity. Dealerships, the front line of GM's consumer presence, felt the strain immediately. Customers postponed purchases, fearing unresolved safety issues. Showroom traffic declined, and resale values of certain models dropped sharply. Some dealers offered aggressive discounts just to move inventory, further eroding profit margins. For small-town dealerships that depended almost entirely on GM sales, the downturn was existential. A few closed altogether, citing unsustainable losses and declining brand trust. Suppliers and factory workers also bore the cost. Production slowdowns rippled through the supply chain as unsold vehicles piled up. Plant managers instituted temporary layoffs, citing market adjustments. Union representatives accused the company of protecting executive bonuses while cutting labor hours. The contrast between record compensation at the top and uncertainty on the factory floor became a powerful symbol of misplaced priorities. Investors, once loyal defenders of GM, began to voice rare public criticism. Major institutional shareholders called for leadership changes and independent oversight of safety and ethics practices. Shareholder meetings turned confrontational, with some demanding that executive bonuses be tied to safety performance rather than profit alone. Financial analysts observed that the scandal had erased years of marketing investment. No advertisement could repair the credibility gap that now defined GM's brand. The broader auto industry took notice. Competitors like Toyota, Ford, and Tesla moved quickly to attract disillusioned GM customers through extended warranties and transparency campaigns. Consumer confidence surveys showed measurable shifts toward rival brands, indicating that GM's loss had become its competitors' gain. By the end of the fiscal year, economists estimated that the scandal had cost GM tens of billions in market value and untold damage to its once formidable reputation. Behind the spreadsheets and quarterly calls, however, the human dimension persisted, workers fearful for their jobs, families burdened by repairs, and communities watching an American industrial icon struggle to regain credibility. The next question was no longer about financial survival, it was whether GM could rebuild the trust it had traded away. As GM's reputation deteriorated, its competitors recognized both a warning and an opportunity. Rival automakers quickly adjusted marketing strategies to capture the market share left vulnerable by GM's decline. Toyota launched nationwide campaigns emphasizing reliability and transparent recall policies. Ford introduced extended warranty programs that explicitly contrasted its customer service model with GM's perceived indifference. Tesla, meanwhile, capitalized on the crisis by highlighting its over-the-air software updates, presented as proof that safety corrections could be immediate and public, rather than delayed and concealed. Dealership data suggested that the impact was swift. Surveys conducted by Cox Automotive in 2024 showed a measurable migration of former GM owners to competitor brands, particularly those promoting robust safety reputations. Trade-in programs offering generous valuations for GM vehicles accelerated this shift. Toyota dealers in the Midwest reported double-digit increases in first-time buyers who previously identified as lifelong Chevy families. The language of loyalty, once GM's greatest strength, had become its liability. The ripple effects extended beyond sales. Industry analysts noted a broader cultural recalibration inside other automakers. Compliance teams expanded, safety engineers were given greater authority, and executive bonuses began linking to recall response times and consumer satisfaction scores. The logic was simple. If GM's downfall demonstrated anything, it was that ignoring early warnings could destroy decades of brand equity in months. At the same time, suppliers began diversifying contracts away from GM to reduce exposure to reputational risk. Parts manufacturers that once relied on GM orders sought partnerships with Asian and European brands. This shift altered supply chain dynamics, redistributing economic activity across regions that had historically depended on GM's production network. Politically, the scandal fueled legislative proposals for industry-wide oversight reforms. Lawmakers pushed for centralized recall databases and mandatory public reporting of safety-related correspondence between automakers and regulators. These measures gained bipartisan traction, largely because voters, many of them affected GM owners, demanded visible accountability. For GM, the resurgence of its rivals underscored how trust, once lost, rarely returns in full. The company faced a competitive landscape transformed not by innovation alone, but by moral repositioning. In the court of public opinion, its peers had rewritten the definition of reliability, leaving GM struggling to prove that it still belonged in the conversation. By the time GM's leadership issued its final round of apologies, the narrative had already moved beyond corporate missteps. The scandal had become a case study in modern capitalism, how an institution can master efficiency, marketing, and technology, yet stumble on integrity. GM's engineers continued building vehicles, its dealerships kept operating, and its investors still monitored quarterly reports. But the intangible asset that once anchored the brand, trust, had been fundamentally weakened. The lessons from the GM crisis reverberate far beyond the automotive sector. It revealed the fragility of consumer confidence in an era of data-driven commerce and rapid technological change. When companies treat safety as a negotiable expense and privacy as a commodity, the public inevitably pushes back. Regulators strengthen rules, competitors seize the ethical high ground, and loyal customers quietly walk away. For GM, rebuilding credibility will require more than rebranding campaigns or redesigned dashboards. It will demand structural transparency, open reporting of defects, independent oversight of safety decisions, and genuine respect for the customers whose lives depend on the machines they buy. The company's future hinges on proving that it can learn from its failures rather than manage them away. Still, within every collapse lies a possibility. The same industrial scale that once enabled GM's mistakes could, if redirected, become a force for reform. Implementing real-time safety analytics, prioritizing ethical data governance, and empowering engineers over accountants could transform the company into a model for responsible innovation. However, whether GM takes that path remains uncertain, but the choice will define its legacy for generations. For consumers, the scandal offers a reminder that loyalty must be earned continuously, not inherited. Each purchase is a vote of confidence, and each recall notice is a test of corporate conscience. In the end, the story of GM is less about one company's fall than about a public awakening that in a world of billion-dollar brands, accountability is still the most valuable feature any product can offer. Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.